There's something subtle and invisible that many of us carry like a second skin. It's the desire to be liked, to be seen as nice, easygoing, chill, low maintenance. We wear these masks not because we are fake, but because, somewhere along the way, we learned that being ourselves was too risky. So we became the good girl, the good boy, the quiet one, the helper, the peacekeeper, the one who never says no. But here's the price we never talk about. Being the good one often means being the invisible one. And when you're invisible for too long, you start to forget that you exist. This chapter is not about blaming your childhood, your parents, or society. It's about seeing how you were shaped. Because we can't change what we don't recognize. Maybe as a child, love felt conditional. If you were obedient, you were praised. If you got angry, you were punished. If you were loud, you were told to be quiet. If you cried, you were called dramatic. So you adapted. You learned that love was something you earned, not something you simply received. And so began the long path of self-betrayal dressed up as kindness. You said yes when you wanted to scream no. You stayed silent to keep the peace. You apologized for things that weren't your fault. You laughed at jokes that made you uncomfortable. You became a chameleon in every room, blending in so perfectly that no one ever noticed how much it was costing you. And the cost was steep. Constant anxiety, overthinking every interaction, struggling to make decisions without asking someone else first, feeling like you don't even know who you are anymore. Jung called this the loss of self, because when you live your life performing roles based on what others expect, you slowly disconnect from your essence. Your preferences, muted. Your boundaries, blurred. Your voice, silenced. You're no longer living, you're auditioning for approval. And that's where burnout begins. Not just physical exhaustion, but soul exhaustion. Because you're not tired from doing too much. You're tired from doing what's not aligned. Let me tell you about a woman named Maya. Maya was the good one in every room she entered. At work, she took on extra tasks so her team wouldn't feel overwhelmed. In her relationship, she always compromised, letting her partner choose the movie, the restaurant, even the city they lived in. With her family, she avoided confrontation. Even when her brother insulted her choices or her mother guilt-tripped her for not visiting enough. Maya smiled through it all. Until one day she broke down in the middle of her kitchen while pouring coffee. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because she realized she didn't even know how she liked her coffee anymore. She had spent so long adjusting to everyone else's needs, she forgot what her own were. And that was the moment her healing began. Healing doesn't always begin with rage. Sometimes it begins with the quiet ache of recognition. The moment you realize that people love the version of you that keeps them comfortable, but not the real you. And then you face the hardest question. If I stop people pleasing, who am I underneath? Here's the paradox. The more you betray yourself to be accepted, the less you feel truly loved. Because even when they say, I love you, a voice inside whispers, they don't even know the real me. True love, true connection requires truth. And truth requires boundaries. That's why individuation, as Jung described it, is not just a philosophical journey. It's a practical rebellion. It's saying, I choose me, even if it disappoints you. Not to be cruel, not to be cold, but because the cost of not choosing yourself is a life of quiet resentment. Some people will guilt you when you stop overgiving. Some will call you selfish when you start setting boundaries. They're not used to the real you. They're used to the version of you that performed emotional labor for free. Let them adjust. You are not responsible for managing other people's reactions to your truth. Your job is to be loyal to yourself. So how do you begin? Start small. Say, let me think about it instead of automatically saying yes. Take a breath before responding. Notice when your body tenses up around certain people or requests. That's your inner compass trying to speak. Honor it. And most importantly, forgive yourself. Forgive the years you spent betraying your needs just to feel safe. You were doing what you had to do to survive. But now, it's time to thrive. You were not born to be easy to digest. You were not born to be convenient. You were not born to make everyone else comfortable. You were born to be whole. Unapologetically. Unedited. And the journey to that wholeness begins the moment you stop trying to be the good one and start being the real one. Because that version of you, that's the one who will finally feel peace. They say love is the safest place on earth. But for many of us, love became the place where we lost ourselves most completely. Not in the poetic way, but in the painful, anxious, walking on eggshells kind of way. Because when you are a people pleaser, even love becomes performance. You don't show up in a relationship as you are. You show up as who you think they want. You edit your voice. You shrink your needs. You sacrifice your boundaries not once, but over and over, until one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize yourself. And what's worse, you call it love. You start confusing compliance with connection. You think keeping the peace is the same as intimacy. You convince yourself that if they stay, that means you're loved, even if staying requires you to disappear piece by piece. But Carl Jung warned us, individuation is becoming the person you are inherently meant to be, not what others want you to be. And there's no greater test of that truth than in relationships, because love will always show you the parts of yourself you've abandoned. Let me introduce you to someone, Emily. Emily was in a 3-year relationship with a man named Josh. Josh wasn't abusive. He wasn't unkind. But he had expectations. He didn't like it when Emily cried too much. He rolled his eyes when she brought up insecurities. He said she was too emotional, too sensitive, too intense. So Emily adapted. She learned to cry in silence. She rehearsed conversations in her head before bringing them up. She made herself smaller, lighter, easier to carry. She became agreeable, undemanding, and low maintenance. And the result? Josh stayed. But Emily vanished. That's the problem with people-pleasing in relationships. You'll get attention but not affection. You'll get loyalty but not intimacy. You'll get proximity but not connection. Because how can someone truly love you when you've buried your real self to keep them close? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes they don't even ask us to betray ourselves. We do it preemptively. We anticipate rejection before it arrives, so we perform instead of expressing. We suppress instead of asking. We mold ourselves before anyone even criticizes us. That's not love. That's emotional contortion. And it's exhausting. When love feels conditional, you begin to overthink everything. Should I text first? Did I say too much? Am I being too needy? You read tone like it's scripture. You analyze response time like it's a threat. You interpret silence as failure. You feel like every interaction is a test, and the grade determines your worth. That's not connection. That's survival mode. If you're nodding along right now, I want you to pause and hear this. You are not too much. You were just with someone who only knows how to love half of you. And your job is not to become smaller to fit into someone's comfort zone. Your job is to expand into your full truth, so the right people can actually see you. That's why detachment isn't about ghosting. It's not a punishment. It's protection. It's reclaiming your energy from spaces that never really held you. Because a person who loves the version of you that's agreeable, silent, and constantly available isn't loving you. They're loving the image you created to feel safe. And safety that requires self-abandonment is not safety at all. Remember Maya from chapter 1? Let me tell you about her again. After her breakdown in the kitchen, Maya made a choice. She didn't leave her partner right away, but she started speaking. At first, it was awkward. Her voice trembled. She cried. She said things like, "When you ignore my feelings, I disappear. I need space to be fully myself, not just who makes you comfortable." Her partner? He resisted. He was confused. He said, "Why are you changing?" Maya answered, "I'm not changing. I'm just showing you who I've always been." That sentence changed everything, not because it saved the relationship, but because it saved her. Individuation in relationships doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means finally walking into yourself. It means letting go of the fear that being fully seen will make someone leave. Because here's the paradox. If your authenticity makes them walk away, they were never really with you. And if it brings someone closer, that's not magic. That's resonance. Real connection only exists when both people can be real. So how do you begin detaching from conditional love? Not with resentment, but with clarity. You say, "I love you, but I will not betray myself to keep you." You practice boundaries even if your voice shakes. You stay rooted in your truth even if it costs you comfort. You remind yourself that rejection isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's redirection. You trust that your presence is not a gift for those who demand a watered-down version of you. It's a sacred offering for those who can honor your wholeness. Here's the deepest lesson of this chapter. If you have to abandon yourself to be loved, it's not love. It's negotiation. And your worth is not negotiable. You are not a half-price version of yourself waiting to be picked. You are a complete person waiting to be met. And that begins when you stop contorting yourself to be kept and start expressing yourself to be seen. Because the moment you choose your truth over their comfort, that's the moment you come home to yourself. There's a moment right after you hit send. You wait. You stare at your phone, and your heart starts to race. What if they don't reply? What if they saw it and didn't care? Should I have said something different? Should I say more? Should I say nothing? And just like that, you're no longer in the present. You're spiraling, caught in a mental loop that has nothing to do with facts, and everything to do with fear. This is the overthinking trap. And if you've ever been there, you know it's not a place you visit occasionally. It can become your whole world. A world where you analyze tone like evidence in a courtroom. Where silence is a punishment. Where a read with no reply feels like a rejection. Where the story you tell yourself becomes more painful than anything that actually happened. And the worst part? You think it's all your fault. Here's the truth you need to hear. Overthinking is not a personality trait. It's a trauma response. It's the brain trying to protect you from abandonment, judgment, or rejection. But instead of keeping you safe, it keeps you stuck. Stuck in stories. Stuck in patterns. Stuck in a version of yourself that's always bracing for impact. Carl Jung didn't talk about overthinking the way modern psychology does, but he understood the root of it. He called it the fragmented psyche. When your identity is built on external approval, every silence becomes a threat. Because without others' reactions, you have no internal compass. You depend on someone else's validation to confirm your worth, your desirability, your place in the world. That's why you replay conversations. That's why you scan messages for hidden meanings. That's why you can't sleep. It's not because you're dramatic. It's because you've never been taught how to validate yourself. Let me introduce someone who knows this too well. Jasmine. Jasmine was successful, smart, funny. But in relationships, she unraveled. One unanswered message could ruin her whole day. She would read it a dozen times, check timestamps, check his social media to see if he was online. She hated feeling needy, so she never said anything directly. Instead, she overfunctioned. She sent memes to seem lighthearted. She asked casual questions to test the waters. She even deleted and rewrote messages multiple times. Not to express herself, but to manage perception. But deep down, she was afraid. Not of being alone, but of being dismissed, ignored, forgotten. That's what the overthinking trap does. It convinces you that your survival depends on saying the right thing at the right time in the right way to the right person. You become addicted to potential outcomes. You mentally live in what-if territory 24/7. And worst of all, you forget what you actually feel, because you're too busy rehearsing someone else's reaction. Overthinking isn't just a mental loop. It's a spiritual distraction. It pulls you out of your intuition, out of your body, out of your truth, and plants you in a fake reality curated by fear. You stop asking, "What do I need?" and start asking, "What do they want from me?" That is the exact opposite of individuation, because individuation is about coming home to yourself. And overthinking is the act of leaving yourself over and over again. So how do you break this cycle? Let me be clear. You don't do it by controlling outcomes. You do it by anchoring in your truth. You practice stillness instead of surveillance. You say, "They didn't respond. That's neutral. What I attach to that silence, that's mine to heal." You ask yourself, is this thought helpful or is it fear in disguise? You remind yourself, someone's delay in replying is not a verdict on my worth. And if you forget all of that, you come back to this. What would I do if I fully trusted myself? Trust. That's what overthinking robs you of. Self-trust. Because people-pleasing teaches you to read others before reading yourself. It teaches you to anticipate instead of embody, to strategize instead of feel, to guess instead of know. But here's the truth. You don't have to earn love by being perfect. You don't have to micromanage your way into matching. You don't have to perform clarity in someone else's head just to feel safe in your own skin. That is not love. That is anxiety disguised as effort. And you deserve better. Let's go back to Jasmine. Eventually, she started therapy. She began to write down every anxious thought in a journal instead of acting on it. She learned to ask, is this my voice or my fear? Do I want to send this message because it's authentic, or because I want a reaction? She began to trust silence, not because it always meant good things, but because she stopped making silence mean everything. That changed her. Not overnight, but enough that one day, when she didn't get a reply, she went out for a walk instead of checking her phone. She didn't spiral. She didn't perform. She just lived. And in that living, she came back to herself. This is the key. You don't need certainty to be calm. You need self-anchoring. Because if your peace depends on how others respond, you'll always be at war. But if your peace is rooted in self-awareness, everything changes. You're no longer desperate for replies. You're selective with your energy. You stop chasing answers and start listening inward. That's where individuation begins. In the pause between reaction and response. In the stillness between the thought and the truth. Let me end with this. You are not the version of yourself someone didn't reply to. You are not the person someone misunderstood once. You are not the messages you regret, the silence you filled, the calls you overthought. You are not your performance. You are your presence. And when you reclaim that presence, without apology, without neediness, without constant self-editing, you reclaim your peace. Overthinking will still visit. But now, it won't be able to stay. Because your mind may question, but your soul will know. I am no longer chasing clarity from others. I am becoming clarity within myself. We live in a culture that worships self-discipline. Wake up at 5 a.m. Do the cold shower. Cut carbs. Train harder. Work longer. Hustle. Grind. Repeat. And if you ever feel tired, that's weakness. If you need rest, you're lazy. If you want softness, you're not serious about success. That's what we've been taught. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Some of the most disciplined people you know are deeply disconnected from themselves. Because not all discipline is healthy. Sometimes, discipline is just self-abandonment with a productivity filter. You're not waking up early because it feels aligned. You're doing it because you're terrified of being left behind. You're not cutting out distractions because you value your energy. You're doing it because you think rest makes you unworthy. You're not improving because you love yourself. You're improving because you secretly hate the current version of you. That's not discipline. That's self-rejection. This is what people pleasers do when they can't get approval from others anymore. They turn the pressure inward. They build routines and rules and to-do lists, not from self-love but from fear. They don't eat the cookie, not because they're honoring their body, but because they fear losing control. They push themselves in the gym, not to celebrate their strength, but to punish their softness. They work longer hours, not because it's fulfilling, but because they don't know who they are without being productive. It looks impressive from the outside, but inside, it's hollow. Because self-control that comes from shame will always turn on you. Carl Jung knew this long before modern psychology caught on. He said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." But he also warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And here's the unconscious belief many of us carry. I am only valuable when I'm useful. That's not individuation. That's internalized capitalism dressed as self-help. Let me tell you about a man named Aaron. Aaron was the definition of high performance. He ran marathons. He built a business from scratch. He read a book a week. He journaled, meditated, tracked every calorie. People praised him all the time. "Wow, you're so focused. I wish I had your discipline." But what they didn't see was the panic attack he had when he missed one gym day. The guilt he carried for eating dessert at his own birthday. The shame spiral that came when he didn't complete all the tasks on his productivity app. Aaron wasn't thriving. He was surviving under the mask of control. Because somewhere deep inside, he didn't believe he was worthy of love unless he was always improving. This is what happens when we confuse growth with punishment. When we think success means sacrificing softness. When we believe rest is earned, not essential. And slowly we begin to turn our own minds into battlegrounds. Every desire becomes a threat. Every need for pause becomes something to fight. Every imperfection becomes a flaw we must fix. We stop being human. We become projects. Projects we can never seem to finish. So how do we shift? How do we know if our discipline is healthy or if it's just another mask? Ask yourself, am I doing this because it honors me or because I'm trying to outrun shame? If no one ever saw the results, would I still want to do it? Is this a ritual of self-love or a ritual of self-punishment? Because real discipline is devotion, not desperation. It's rooted in clarity, not anxiety. It feels nourishing, not depleting. Let's go back to Aaron. After months of burnout, he finally paused. He stopped waking up at 5 a.m. He deleted the calorie app. He skipped a gym day. And the sky didn't fall. What did fall was the illusion. The illusion that his worth depended on perfection. The illusion that if he rested, everything he built would collapse. What actually happened? He began to breathe. And for the first time in years, he felt human. Not optimized. Not impressive. Just present. And in that presence, his real growth began. Here's the key difference. Self-improvement says, I'm not enough yet. I must fix myself. Self-connection says, I am already whole. I choose to evolve. One is fear-based. The other is soul-based. One comes from pressure. The other comes from purpose. And only one will bring you peace. So next time you feel the urge to be better, ask, who told me I wasn't already good enough? Was it a parent? A teacher? A past partner? Or was it a belief I picked up trying to fit in? Because individuation means peeling back every rule you inherited and asking if it still fits. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to be a machine to be respected. You don't have to suffer to be worthy. You don't have to hustle your way into wholeness. You are already whole. Even when you're resting. Even when you're soft. Even when you're not improving anything. Discipline is beautiful when it's sacred. When it's guided by love, not by fear. When it brings you closer to yourself, not further from your needs. When it builds your life, not burns through your soul. That is what real discipline looks like. And that is the discipline that lasts. There comes a moment, quiet, unceremonious, when you stop trying to be impressive. You stop performing. You stop negotiating. And instead, you ask yourself a single question. Who am I when no one is watching? That's not just a philosophical inquiry. That's the beginning of freedom. Because for most of your life, you've been trying to be something for someone. The good daughter. The high achiever. The nice girlfriend. The spiritual one. The disciplined one. The selfless one. Each role got you something. Praise. Belonging. Love, at least the conditional kind. But beneath it all you felt it, the dissonance, the hollowness of being liked for a mask you created. The ache of never being fully seen, not even by yourself. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, individuation is becoming the person you are inherently meant to be, not what others want you to be. And most of us, let's be honest, don't even know who that is. Because we've spent years adapting, shifting, overthinking, pleasing, proving, avoiding, until our true self is buried under layers of protection that eventually became our personality. But protection is not identity, and survival mode is not living. So how do you start shedding the roles? How do you move from approval seeking to soul alignment? You start by accepting a difficult truth. Not everyone will like the real you. Some people will feel uncomfortable when you stop accommodating them. Some will criticize your boundaries. Some will withdraw when you stop performing. Let them, because the you that needs everyone's approval is the you that's still afraid to be free. And freedom, as it turns out, is not painless, but it's honest. Individuation is not about becoming someone better. It's about becoming someone truer. Someone who no longer looks outside for validation. Someone who doesn't ask, do they like me? But instead asks, do I respect myself? Because the person you have to live with at the end of every day is you. Not your followers. Not your partner. Not your parents. And if you don't like who you are when the mask is off, no amount of likes, love, or success will ever be enough. Let me tell you about Lila. Lila had always been a chameleon. In every job, she mirrored the vibe of the room. In every relationship, she adapted to what the other person needed. She was the reliable one, the kind one, the chill one. But inside, she was angry. Because her needs were always last. Her boundaries were always broken. Her life wasn't hers. One day, after yet another breakup where she had disappeared into someone else's expectations, she wrote a letter to herself. It said, I'm done shaping myself to be digestible. I want to be whole, even if that means being misunderstood. That letter changed everything. Because individuation starts with a decision. A sacred one. The decision to disappoint others before you betray yourself again. The decision to walk alone if that's what integrity requires. The decision to be misunderstood rather than misaligned. That's when you know you're on the path, not of perfection, but of presence. Not of image, but of integration. Not of strategy, but of soul. You start choosing relationships where you don't have to earn your place. You start expressing truths without sugarcoating them for comfort. You start setting boundaries, not to punish others, but to protect your energy. You start listening to your body, to your gut, to your instincts. You stop seeking the crowd's applause and start honoring your own rhythm. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing closure from people who never gave you clarity to begin with. And slowly you begin to feel something radical. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer pretending. Here's the final truth. Approval is addicting, but authenticity is sustainable. The former keeps you chasing. The latter keeps you grounded. The former gets you attention. The latter gives you peace. And peace? That's the quietest, most powerful revolution there is. You won't get a round of applause when you individuate. You might even get criticism, distance, silence. But what you gain is everything. Your time, your clarity, your voice, your presence, and most importantly, yourself. So let me leave you with this. You are not here to be consumed. You are not here to be everyone's favorite. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember who you are and to return to that over and over again. Even if no one claps. Even if it gets lonely. Even if it's hard. Because the journey home to yourself is the only one that actually liberates you. Individuation is not the end. It's the beginning of a life that no longer asks, will they like me? But instead says, do I feel aligned? And if the answer is yes, then that is enough. That is everything.